I find that oftentimes when I'm working with women, it's very spontaneous. It's not thought out ahead of time. And so it gets to this place where you're feeling pressure to get something done and you can't operate in alignment with your cycle. And the number one way that we can avoid this is literally by just mapping it out ahead of time. Okay, so here we are again. I am doing another video-based podcast. So, I'm staying true to my commitment to try something new, something vulnerable. And I know last week I ended the episode talking about my mentor, James. And even just right before I got on here, I was watching a video about these insights and these things that we learn and how important it is for us to take the things that we're learning and put them into practice, right? It's easy for us to learn these things about ourselves, learn the things that in the areas that we need to grow, but then not actually do it, not actually take advantage of it and actually put it into action, right? And so the aha or the takeaway isn't valuable unless you're actually using it and putting it into practice. So even all of the things that I've shared with you on the podcast, the things that you're learning from me, the things you're learning from other people, or even maybe the thing I say that then ripples for you and then you learn it somewhere else. Maybe I perk the ear for you and then you start to notice it and you hear it from somebody else and it resonates and it lands or whatever. None of that's going to matter unless you actually take action, unless you actually put it forth. So I'm walking away with that insight right now and that aha, and being true to you, I'm showing how I am learning. I am doing these things and I am committed to taking the actions that are going to cause me to grow and expand. And I want you to have that same element of how can I be committed to myself? How can I be committed to growing and expanding? Right. And then there's an episode coming up in the next few weeks about integrity and what that means and how it's so easy to be committed to everybody else and to commit to everything else, but staying committed and being integrity to what we've committed to ourselves and that growth that we've said we're going to do for us is a whole different ballgame. And yet it's one of the ones that I think is the most important, the most valuable. When you say that you're going to do something for yourself and then you actually follow through on that, when you learn that aha and then you actually take action on it, so powerful, so powerful. Okay, but that's a whole nother side note. Today, what I really want to talk to you about is last week we talked about why it's so important that your business match up with your cycle and how that makes such a huge difference. Today, I want to talk about how you actually line up your launch, right? What does that look like? How can we take a launch, which is oftentimes very connotated with this like stressful event? People talk about, launching. How can we make the launch easy? How can we take your cycle and really maximize on where you're at so that the launch doesn't feel so heavy? There was a few years ago, I was talking to my husband, same thing, like I was launching and putting my stuff out there. And I was an utter shit show, to be frank. Like it was a mess. I was stressed. I was overwhelmed. I was staying up late. I was getting up early, wasn't happy with the kids. I was angry. I was irritable. And looking at that whole thing is like, is this really worth it? Is this really who I want to be in this moment? And is there a better option? Is there a different way? To where I am today is that launching, especially when it's requiring me to do and grow outside of what I've done before, does take a little bit of effort, but it's a whole different game. It's a whole different element. I don't feel that level of stress and anxiety around launching that I did a few years ago. And I think that lining it up with my cycle has been a huge game changer. Working with James is also a huge game changer. So if you're not registered for his free training coming up next week, you need to do that. reneefick.com/CEO, huge game changer. The other big thing has been for me is like this idea of rinse and repeat. Doing the same launch multiple times has really got me to this place where I can sometimes not even feel like I'm in launch mode. Like launching just feels like another day. It doesn't feel this pressure and anxiety that I used to feel towards it. So part of that also comes in the sense of when I've rinsed and repeated and I've taken in the elements of my cycle to prepare for that, it makes it this simple, easy, effortless. I don't want to say effortless because it definitely is work, right? Like I don't want want to come across as like how she makes it just easy and whatever. It does take work, right? It does. Launching and running a business does take work, but it can feel different. It doesn't have to feel that pressure, the anxiety, and the overwhelm in the process. Like you can feel good about it and feel excited about it, right? Like I feel excited every time I launch. I feel excited every time I'm doing something to prepare for it. And that's what I want for you. So I'm going to give you 4 different steps to really creating a launch that's designed around your cycle so that you can really get into that place of feeling like it's in flow. It feels easier, right? Like it feels good. It feels aligned and it doesn't have this constant pressure the whole time. So the first step is to evaluate what your goals are. What are those goals that you have for your launch? And then map out your launch as to what you need to get done in that to meet those goals. So it's looking at the whole big picture, the whole big launch, not just, okay, this is the week, I'm going to do my launch in this 1 week, but what are all of the pieces that need to go into that before that? So are you starting your launch runway 3 months before? Are you creating reels and social media to really warm people up as you go? Like, what does that whole sequence, that whole thing look like? And really map it out. I find that oftentimes when I'm working with women, it's very spontaneous. It's not thought out ahead of time. And so it gets to this place where you're feeling pressure to get something done and you can't operate in alignment with your cycle. And the number one way that we can avoid this is literally by just mapping it out ahead of time. Because when you map it out and you know, like, I have to do this, 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 and this, and this, then we're able to then label those things. So that's your next step, is to really create that big to-do list. When I am launching and creating any big project, actually, like my to-do list, I use ClickUp. And in ClickUp, I go in there and I put in my to-do list, it has a tag where I actually put the phase of the month in there. So it says accelerate or connect or whatever the phase is. And I put that on there, so that when I'm glancing over my to-do list, if I know I'm in my connect phase, I'm going to grab those connect phase to-dos and get those done. Going back to that idea last week of like, it's going to get faster and easier. You're going to get it out faster and more simpler, more effective, more magnetic, more radiant, all of those types of things when you're doing it in the proper zone. So map it out, know what we're doing, know where we're going, what's the dates, right? Start even talking about it. So many times we don't even talk about the launch that's coming until it's right there, but tell your audience it's coming. Tell your audience it's coming. And the best way to do that is to know when it's coming yourself. Stop being so spontaneous. Get out of this, like, I'm going to just launch next month and throwing it out there. Like, not to say, I don't want to prevent you from taking action at all. Like, I don't want you to sit there and be like, if it's putting it out or not, I'd rather you get stuff out, but let's start being proactive, right? Like, let's start acting like the $1 million CEO that you desire to be. And $1 million CEO is not operating in spontaneity. They may be doing something spontaneously, but mapping out a launch is not one of those things. So start embracing that $1 million CEO that you are right now. Start taking that on right now by these simple actions of mapping out your launch. Then step number 2 is to create the to-do list. Think about everything that you're going to have to do. Graphics, copy, reels, the email sequences, the landing pages, all of that stuff, right? What is every step that needs to go into your launch, and have it all ready to go. Then you're going to go through and actually highlight, well, which ones are going to somebody else? Which ones are you delegating to a VA or getting off of your plate? So you're not even doing it in the first place. So that's step number 1 on that. Then number 2 would be to go through and highlight each of the different to-dos based on what phase you're in. What color do they get? Is it a connect phase task? Is it an accelerate phase task? Is it a reflect phase task? Because once you have those itemized out, then you're going to be able to match up your cycle to fit. Okay. So then looking at your cycle, where does your cycle fall in that launch runway? If your launch is scheduled for the time when you are on your period and you're in your recharge phase, my best recommendation is that you reschedule your launch. That is not going to be your prime time for showing up and being engaged and being present and being totally with it. It's the time when you want to be reclused and recharging. So in a launch, which requires lots of energy going out, it's not the best time. So looking at your schedule and your map of like your launch and what needs to go into it, I would shift and adjust your launch so that it matches up with that connect phase, right? That's your prime time. If you're doing a live launch, a challenge launch, anything like that, that's going to require you to be face-to-face, that's your best time is your connect phase, right? You're the most magnetic, the most radiant, the most connected with your audience in that phase. So making sure that it's in that phase is the best time. The other thing that I really love about that is that leading up to your launch, there's almost always like these last little things you have to do right before a launch. And so your accelerate phase comes right before that. So it helps you like cross your T's, dot your I's, get all that stuff done right before you launch. So now that we have an idea of where your launch is, or like what are the tasks, what are the things that we need to do with our launch, we've synced your launch up so that your launch, like the actual time when you're going to be live, is during the time when you're most prime for it. Then the last step is to take that to-do list and then block out all of the different things that you have to get done based on where your cycle's at. This is what I call cycle blocking. Time blocking isn't as effective for women because you don't know what you're going to feel, how you're going to feel. But when you use cycle blocking, what you do is you take those reels, social media, all of that face-to-face sort of tasks that you have to do, and you put that on your to-do list to do that week that you're going to be in that connect phase. Or if you have writing and all the emails and the copy and the ads and all of those types of things that you have to do, you put that in your reflect phase. So you go through and you block out in your calendar based on where your cycle's at so that you can strategically create that runway for you, but it's not having to do it all the same. Do you see why even going back to this idea of like mapping it out and being proactive about your launch, how it helps? Because it doesn't necessarily, when we're just acting in that 1 month, when you look at just that 1 month, you're not going to be able to get all of it done using your cycle. You're going to need to have the social media content to push out the month of your launch, right? So if you're waiting until that connect phase, well, the connect phase is the time when you're choosing to do your launch and you do your runway or your live launch, right? So if you're waiting and then now you don't have all that social media content. So you have to do the social media content and the reels and the trainings and things like that the month before. And the same thing with the emails and the sequences and stuff like that. You have to write that the month before or 2 months before. So the longer your runway, the better for operating within your cycle, but also the longer the runway, the more strategic you get about pulling people in so that that launch can get bigger. One of the biggest mistakes that I have seen most women entrepreneurs making when I work together is operating in this more reactive space, right? I got to get this done, so I'm going to do it now. I got to get this done, launches next week. I've got to do it. But when you operate in this seasonal cycle sort of rhythm, it allows you to be more proactive. You're not operating in that like fight or flight anxiety response of like, I have to get it done right now. It's much more intentional, much more thought out, much more proactive. And that gets you off this hamster wheel, makes you more effective, and makes you more magnetic. You're feeling less stressed out, right? When I sit there and I look at my runway of what I need to get done, and I know, hey, I don't feel like being on social media today, but I have all these reels ready to go. I have all this stuff lined up for my launch coming up, but I'm not having to think about it. I'm not having to put it together right now when I don't feel like doing it because I was proactive ahead of time. It lightens the load. It takes the stress down. Okay, so let's recap those phases one more time, right? So map out your launch, map out what that's going to look like strategically. I tend to follow about a 3-month launch runway. I have 1 month that's geared towards really inviting people into my launch event. 1 month that's really geared around showing people what's possible and what's available to them. And then 1 month that's really geared towards helping just build brand awareness and getting more awareness out there. And so I operate in that sort of 3-month rhythm for a launch. Doesn't mean that I don't have other little things going on in between there, but the 3-month rhythm is really what I have found to be the most effective. So when I do that 3 months, I know that I have 2 months to really get all my stuff together, to get my pages together, to get my copy, my reels, my social, all of that stuff done. So what is your launch plan? What is all of that you need? What's that runway going to look like for you? And then listing out all of those to-dos, blocking out which ones are which phase tasks. Then you're going to cycle block them, right? Put them in there with where your cycle's actually at. match it up so that you are getting those things done at a time when you are more optimized to get those things done, right? Stop waiting till the last minute and hustling and just trying to push it out. Stop just shoving and pushing when it doesn't feel good. A little bit of preparation, a little bit of advanced planning can be a game changer for you and get you into this place of launching is easy. Launching is fun. Launching is exciting. And I welcome it because it's not that pressure intensity at the very last minute. I know earlier in the episode, I mentioned my mentor, James, and I mentioned his training. I want to recap it a little bit too, because even if maybe right now the stress and the thought of like, what do I actually do with a runway? What do I actually need to be doing? How do I do this? James is that go-to guy, right? He's the expert in all of those systems, all of those strategies, all of that runway launch planning, all that kind of stuff. So that, and then marrying that with the cycle can be a game changer. So make sure that you are registered for that training. I guarantee you will not regret it. Just go over to reneefick.com/CEO so that you can make sure to get into that training. It will be amazing, mind-blowing, wonderful. And he is my go-to, right? If I have any business questions, any thoughts, any things, like James is where I go. So I want you to know that if you've been watching me and wondering like, how did she do this? How did she get there? James is the guy. Okay. I think that's it. I think that's it for today's episode. I will see you all next week.